So today we'll be presenting the phase 1 research as part of the Digital Inclusion LOTI project. So that was a research piece we conducted with an external company called UI7, who went away and interviewed a bunch of residents across Barnet, Brent and Southwark Council. So today you'll be hearing from Maddie from Brent, Shadow from Southwark, and Yagita and Helen, myself, from Barnet. And I'll pass on to Maddie to kick off the session.
Thanks, Helen. So we're going to run through kind of the context and the methodology that we shared with EY7 before we kicked off, and then go through the feedback from those 3 specific resident groups that we spoke to throughout the research. And then at the end, there's a bit of kind of the common themes and equally what we're all going to take forward as a council. As I said, unfortunately, I have to step away at 15:15, but if there are any Brent specific questions, I know Helen, I'm sure we'll pass them on, or otherwise just email me directly. So if we go to the next slide, Helen, thank you. So just kind of an overview of where this sits within the programme. So obviously, as you all know, we've kind of done that first iteration of the map. We've got the personas and the new personas currently being built. And then this is specifically about how digital exclusion groups have been affected and benefited from what's been put in place over the past year. Obviously, hoping that feeds in to kind of London map and policy of a lot of councils who use that London map going forward. Next slide, please. So looking at our research objectives, what we really wanted to understand was, why did these people need digital support, and did the digital support that was provided support them with meeting those needs, but equally how it's helped them further. So for example, when we look at our LD service users, they were using day centres. Yes, did it replace that interaction they were having with day centres? But was it for respite as well, or interactions, and just understanding kind of the broader range of uses for the digital support they were provided with. We also wanted to understand how the council and participants interacted, what kind of support was provided, what were the restrictions of having the device, and how this was communicated with them. And where we're looking at some of our service user groups, how having that device impacted their wider household. So whether that's young people in their household, carers, parents, or other individuals, how they benefited or disbenefited from having that device there. And then lastly, kind of looking at the behaviour side of digital exclusion and furthermore inclusion, how it benefited those individuals, but also what are the challenges around developing those digital skills around behaviour and safety online that we can maybe use, take that knowledge going forward to inform our policy areas. So how kind of the interviews were conducted, they were all over the phone. None of them took place face to face. And those with learning disabilities either had a carer present or kind of a next of kin present who could assist them if there are any challenges with kind of communicating. It was a 60-minute interview, so quite a long one, but we really got some really valuable feedback from that, and it was very natural discussion. And I think that really helped kind of bring out the finer details of kind of the rollout of the digital support. So altogether, there were 16 interviews. I know our initial aim was for 18, but unfortunately, we're only able to get 4 home learning participants. But on the other side of that, 4 of those individuals who received support through the unemployment and skills group were also parents. So they were able to feed in kind of from that home learning perspective what a digital device had contributed to that. So we think we got kind of the deep dive that we required. And yet again, focusing on that kind of awareness, why they took part in the digital support, how they'd experienced it, and how they were finding actually using the digital device at the moment as part of their kind of support. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into each resident group and the specific details around that. So just focusing on the learning disability side, I think what really stood out to me when we had kind of our final feedback session with EY7 was about how a lot of the families had really benefited from the person they were caring for having this device, not just for participating in those day centre activities, but actually accessing music or videos if they had negative behaviour at the time or just were having a bit of a challenging time, that they could actually put on their laptop or tablet, whatever device they had, and engage in that. And actually that just allowed the carer to make a meal or have a bit of respite themselves on top of what the day centre was providing online. The other key thing, and I think there's an individual quote in the report that we'll send round, but again, really powerful. The learning disability individuals felt it really improved their communication skills, keeping this device over this time. And actually one person felt they'd be more confident interacting with individuals now, once we're coming out of lockdown, to where they were 18 months ago. So by being able to create that confidence in a at-home environment on their device, they now had those skills to take those forward as we return to hopefully some form of normality. So the key one around this, I think, was about the type of device we use as well. So I know from a Brent perspective, we gave out Chromebooks, but actually other boroughs gave out tablets and touchscreens. And actually that might be something better for this service user group, and really understanding the different needs of each service user and what will work best for them, particularly individuals who might have mobility issues in their hands. Obviously a mouse and a trackpad can be quite difficult to use. So taking that learning forward, definitely, as Helen will go into at the end, will shape kind of our policies. And the other side, kind of a risk side of thing, was about that safety online. So yes, brilliant, they were interacting with people online, they were participating in activities, but actually there was a concern there, how do they protect themselves online from bullying, from scams or anything like that? So as local authorities, what can we do to support these individuals to access the digital world safely? So whether that's through kind of just simple easy read worksheets when they receive a device, or whether there's specific training that's required. And then the last point was about, we went through day centres at Brent, and I think some of the other local authorities did as well, and continuing that relationship, working closely with them to identify what the needs were really important. And as we hopefully have more variety of devices available going forward, having that knowledge of what the individual's needs are will kind of help what kind of support we can provide them going forward. So I think that's it from me, and it's on to unemployment and skills. Do you want to take questions now or at the end?
We can take one now from Neil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking if you're going to leave it quarter past, it might be good. I'm just really interested in to what extent, or whether this was covered, people with learning disabilities were communicating with each other using the devices.
So I don't know whether it was explicit about whether it was with each other, but I'm sure we can kind of look deeper into that, because you're right, hopefully those connections have been made through day centre activities, and those connections kind of be taken into another conversation.
Yeah, I think that'd be quite an important benefit, I'd imagine, or opportunity to sort of stay connected with the people that they're kind of friends with, and you know, how can digital be used in that way of kind of maintaining and or improving those connections when they're not able to meet in person.
Definitely, no, really valid point. Thanks. Are there any other questions specifically on learning disabilities? No, should we move on to unemployment and skills then?
Thanks, Maddie. So I'm going to cover the insights and considerations for the unemployment and skills level. As Maddie mentioned, 4 of the participants in this group were actually parents. 4 of them also had English as a second language, so it was quite a diverse cohort. And within this group, 4 of them received Chromebooks. One of the things that came across was that it allowed them to communicate with people during the lockdown. So there was this word that they used about intense grief. So some people said that as job seekers, they were suffering from intense grief due to maybe losing their business or losing their jobs, and being online helped them to communicate during the lockdown. It also mentioned about using emotionally benefit-led language. So rather than talking about functional skills, so you can learn online skills and you can get a job, you should talk about the benefits around being online. So whether that's communicating with people during the lockdown, or whether that's being able to access maybe therapy, it could be stuff like being able to communicate with your family abroad as well. So focusing on the hook rather than actually talking about the functional skills was a key consideration. It also gave them confidence in terms of learning. So with those people that had English as a second language, a lot of their English classes moved online. Some of the feedback that they gave was that they were previously using a smartphone and it was quite difficult to navigate using a smartphone. Even though they did know how to use one, it was much better to use a laptop. Some of those that did have a laptop said the device or the operating system that they were using was quite old. So having a Chromebook or having a device that they could actually use to go to do lessons actually benefited them. Another consideration was around the pre-installed apps and teachers being able to provide support. Teachers being able to provide support to them. So with the Chromebook, some of them already had installed apps. Some of them had council services installed on there as well. So there were like buttons where they could click on and it would just direct them straight to that. And they said that that helped them feel a bit more confident and able to do their lessons better. In terms of preferred learning styles, so there's like online learning styles or one-to-one, there's something around adapting the learning environment. So if you're, and this is also something that we've gathered by interviewing residents within the borough, if you previously had face-to-face learning, it's a lot more difficult to try and navigate or try and teach someone how to do something via online without being near them. So there was something around having to adapt their learning style in that way. And then they spoke about Chromebooks having an easy to learn operating system. But as you know, and I can speak for myself, most of us have Windows operating systems rather than Chromebooks. So there's something around having to go back into the job market and having to use a Windows device or even a MacBook when you've actually used a Chromebook to learn all these things. There was a quote from a resident in Southwark who said he doesn't allow his children to go next to the laptop because he's afraid they'll mess it up. And this is also, I think, something to consider is figuring out whether you're going to give it to them on loan or whether you're actually going to give it to them as just as a gift so that they can use going forward, because then it allows them to feel a bit more confident and allows them, their extended family, to use it as well. Because one of the other things that they mentioned was that they were borrowing laptops within either from their neighbours or within their family as well. And then finally, it talks about how you need to weigh up the pros and cons of the loan devices, like I just said, and basically enable extended family to use that. And I think a few participants were reluctant to do certain activities on the laptop because they didn't want to mess it up. So there's something around the language and the framing of whatever you give them and letting them know that they can use it for extracurricular activities beyond their lessons. I'm going to pass on to Helen.
Yes, thank you, Sade. If there's any question, oh, Neil?
Oh, sorry, I can wait until the end, sorry.
You sure? Okay,
yeah, sure.
Cool. We'll keep them to the end then so we can get through the content. So yeah, thank you for that, Sade. So the third and final resident group we interviewed was a home learning group. So as a reminder, it was 4 home learning participants. So that's parents we interviewed who received device or free broadband to support their child's homeschooling while the schools were closed during lockdown. So to paint a bit of a picture on this group, the lockdown obviously impacted children's sort of education, but also their social connection with their peers. And so the parents we found in our interviews are very eager to ensure that their children both, kept up with their online schooling, but also they maintained that social interaction with their peers and, felt like they could be included in group activities and still see their friends, even if it was online rather than in person. Another kind of aspect of this group that we found through this research was that it's quite common that the children perhaps not only didn't have a device, but perhaps also didn't have a suitable device for homeschooling, right? And this made it sort of very challenging and stressful to them. So when I say they didn't have a suitable device, I mean, for example, that the device that they had was either too old to run applications like Google Classroom, were too slow to load the lessons, they might have like connection issues, which we all know could be quite stressful in meetings when we drop off, or aren't, you know, we can't hear each other, or potentially enough devices to cover all the children in the household. So parents who have multiple children, they would need to sort of swap the devices and almost navigate how much time each child spent on each, and therefore lessons could be missed as a result. Another aspect of that is if they didn't have a laptop, they'd be streaming the lessons on their smartphones, but actually the screens could be really small. So it would cause their children to sort of lose focus on lessons. And so I guess a follow-up point on that is that homeschooling had the impact of almost excluding children who couldn't afford a suitable device, right? And so a tangible example of that from the interviews was one participant had to give up on online schooling altogether in order to avoid stressing out as a result. And so therefore her two children were behind the curriculum, and then also behind versus their peers too. But I guess on the flip side of that, what digital inclusion support enabled them to do was firstly, improve their confidence in learning and maintain social interaction. So they could participate in group activities, they could submit assessments on time, and also really helped with those children who had additional needs, so it's like learning needs or disabilities. One of the participants, this is a direct quote, she said, "It's the only way she has a link with education because she's not able to go into the real world of that setting." And I think that participant was also, the child was also able to conduct her therapy online too, as a result of the support she received from the council. So that's really, really positive. Another thing is that the digital inclusion support also minimised the learning resource gap between advantaged and disadvantaged children, and this sort of extended not only from the curriculum learning, so what you are meant to be learning in school, but also wider than that, right? So if we think about learning in terms of developing further online research skills on wider topics such as culture, climate change, religion, but then also being able to access wider learning courses outside the curriculum, so coding, I think Arabic singing was an example, beatboxing, so really great in terms of giving a broader access to learning online. And then also the impact of the support that's been given during the lockdown. Actually, there's much applicability of it towards, post-lockdown. So even when schools are opening, actually, there's a huge value in, these participants have realised a huge value in conducting learning activities online moving forwards. And it's not necessarily something that they would have done before, but actually this has allowed them to adapt to this new way of learning online. There's still some risks to consider and concerns, so that's among sort of internet addiction. So as Maddie mentioned earlier, and internet safety issues. So that kind of prompts us to think as councils, how can we support residents to access the internet safely? And perhaps that's including, one page when we give out devices, or signposting to other sort of safety trainings when we do sort of roll out these devices or these broadband connections. So yeah, we can leave questions to the end, but I'll pass on to Yogita now, who'll discuss sort of common themes between all three groups.
Hi, thanks very much. So yes, so in terms of the common themes, so I won't go over what Maddie and Helen and Sade have already said, but actually what they kind of felt was what we found across the piece was not everyone knew what digital support meant, and everyone kind of had different views of what digital support was, and many of them felt it was just getting a laptop or it was just getting a device, but it was wider than that. So I think it would be quite useful for us to kind of have almost like a bit of a show and tell of what digital support is and what support is out there and where we can support signpost people to. One of the things that was overwhelmingly noticeable was that the digital support we did provide really supported mental well-being. And actually with the social isolation and the confidence building, it really helped everyone across all 3 groups to have that social interaction that many of them were missing or unable to go and get. What we also felt that one of the other things that came out and all 3 groups talked about, and Maddie, Sade and Helen have mentioned this, is that whichever device we give to our residents, it has to be fit for purpose. So a Chromebook might be really useful for someone who's unemployed because it's easy to navigate. However, they would need an MS Office device because that's what we use in the office environment. Same with learning disability group, around touch screen might be better than a keyboard. So really understanding what they need so that we're making sure we have a fit for purpose solution. One of the things that many of the groups said was that the only reason they found out about the support that was available was by talking to other people. So they didn't really know where to go. It wasn't commonly advertised, and you kind of had to navigate quite a lot through councils' websites to get information. And I know one of the groups sort of said they only found out about being able to have access to laptops when they heard it on the news, and then they went on the website and then they had to click through lots of pages before they found where they could get access to the devices. So I think that's a bit around the signposting and how we make it very, very accessible for our residents. And I suppose the final bit is the level of support we give. So for some people, we were giving, I think there isn't a one size fits all. So it's making sure that whatever support we do give, like the devices, is fit for purpose. So some might be able to just turn on the device but know nothing else, but others might know enough to be at an intermediate level but need to get to that advanced level that we need to think about. So there were quite a lot of common themes that came out across all 3 areas that we probably want to take forward. We're now just going to go into sort of considerations around how we might want to take this a little bit further. So is it still me? It is, great. So like I've already said, we overwhelmingly noticed the benefits of digital support across all 3 groups, and really could see how this needs to form the basis of modern life going forward. So even though we're going to go back to normal, the digital world is always going to be here, and we need to take forward these learnings. We've talked about the benefits across all of the groups, and we've talked about how it gave them confidence across their wider lives, and not just in the area of support they were given over the last 15 months. So we could definitely see how digital support and digital provides so much benefit across the wider piece. One of the things we were finding was that actually it was supporting our residents in very different ways. So we had one group from the unemployment and skills group who'd said they'd never ever used Scan and Shop before because they were too scared. And actually over the last 15 months, and having been given access to a device, it gave them the confidence to be able to go into the shops and use Scan and Shop, which then enabled them to get out and do their own shopping, which they were scared to do beforehand. So, really, really positive feedback that was coming out. There is this fear that actually sometimes we might get internet addicted. You've got cyberbullying and all of the safeguarding risks. And I think it's very, 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 we've got to be aware of that, and we've got to keep that at the forefront of our minds, that how do we support these groups who may be vulnerable anyway, but we need to just make sure we've got that level of safeguarding in. And finally, with the home learning group, it was the ability to access learning beyond just their schoolwork. The fact that having a device just opens up their ability to learn so much wider than just that 9 to 5 school day or 9 till 3 school day. So very much about being aware of that. And actually how we could use it in the future, having a different way of working in the future, or a different way of learning in the future. So some of those parents were saying, if my children aren't at school but are okay to learn, could we not just have home learning on that day and they can just click into a lesson? So I think it's taking some of the best bits that have worked and taking it forward into our recovery. I think I'm now passing on to Sade.
Thanks, Yogita. So I'm going to talk about the considerations for future iterations of this support. So whether you're a different borough and you kind of want to apply some of the things we've learned, I think one of the key areas was promotion. As Yogita said, A lot of people heard about this from word of mouth or through community networks. That could also be existing services that they're tapped into. Most of the time, if you're digitally excluded, then it stands to reason that you may not see things on the council website or social media channels. So you need to think about how to tailor your communications accordingly. There was also something around describing the nature of digital activities. So rather than using language or jargon like digital inclusion or digital support or digital services, talk about it from the point of view of the benefits of what that resident can learn. So whether that's communicating, whether it's online support, it could be banking, it could be online shopping. So talk about it in terms of the benefits rather than a functional service. And then just in terms of application, again, work closely with like local day centres, support workers, teachers, even librarians, I guess, and the third sector as well, so charity and organisations, because there's a level of trust that already exists there. So you're just tapping into that and making sure that the residents that use those services can actually go to them for other things. There was something around having those organisations assist with applications. So for instance, a waste disposal application, some of these people can actually provide that assistance and help them rather than having the sign up be a potential barrier, because if it's quite difficult, people can just tend to drop off and not use that anymore. As was discussed already, choice of devices. So with people with learning disabilities, consider using a bigger tablet. For unemployment skills group, even though Chromebook is easier to use, it might not be what they use in their day-to-day job. And then when it comes to home learning, a lot of organizations, a lot of schools use the Google Classroom. So think about that as well. And then in terms of device ownership, consider reframing the language around whether they can use it for other things and what the limitations are if you are loaning it to them. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Just in terms of onboarding and support, so there could be different levels of onboarding depending on what group you're in. So for those that are in the unemployment or skills level, you could consider pre-installing certain apps that they may use. There was also something around maybe upskilling frontline workers, so librarians, support workers, teachers, so that they're equipped to provide frontline support in terms of digital skills to those that may come into those organizations. And then there was also something around providing light training for parents and caregivers, so they can also support their children and the people that are within their care. And then in terms of online safety, for all the groups, so home learning, learning disabilities, and unemployment of skills, there should be a standard basic training for online support. So making sure that you can making sure that you can provide that support to people and they know what's safe and what's not. And then for the unemployment or skills program, there was something around making sure that digital learners are confident and they're upskilled to become digital learners themselves. So almost like a train the trainer model. So you provide support to them and then they can then help their other residents or their neighbours. And there's something around having gone through that program, knowing what it's like to be in that position, you're better equipped to help someone else. And there's also a level of trust that you have with your neighbours as well. And I'll just skip to the last point, which is measurements of success. So yes, a person may be able to use the internet and that's a great thing, but there's also some non-tangible softer elements that we should also consider. So increased confidence, people that are using it for therapy and the benefits that that may have as well. And these are things that typically you can't measure, but it doesn't mean that the program hasn't been successful. I'm going to pass on to Helen.
Yes, thank you, Sade. So that pretty much wraps up the research and the different groups and the themes and future iterations that we should be considering. I guess I want to lead us on to the final bit of today's session, which is the next steps and discussion. So actually off the back of this research, which we had played back to us about a week and a half ago now, I think, what we did as Barnet, Brent and Southwark, because we sort of went away and had a bit of a think and a discussion of actually, we've got this fantastic report of lots of these insights and considerations. What can we do to take forward these actions to really sort of shape policy or sort of drive different business cases and pilots moving forwards? And so what we wanted to do is we share that back to the group today and have a bit of a discussion on, you know, do these feel like the right things? You know, how can we apply these insights to the other councils, that's RBKC and Westminster? And then also, how do we want to sort of include and take these insights forward into the wider project? And so if I talk you through these different actions, and then we can kind of have a bit of a discussion about it in the last 10 minutes after. So from a Barnet perspective, we've presented to the Digital Inclusion Forum, and then off the back of that, we'll also be hosting a sort of workshop with the digital leads to create an action plan and build these insights into the existing work streams, but also have a think about what other work that we need to do within our digital inclusion agenda at Barnet. We'll also be including the project as a case study on our digital hub page, which will be both external to residents and internal, and use these insights to inform its accessibility to different groups as well. From a Brent perspective, they will be using these insights to inform future business cases, which will look at sort of supporting local businesses and residents with all things digital. Can't disclose too much about it for now as it is going through that process, but it's super exciting. So watch this space with that. I'm sure Maddie will loop back once she can share more information. And then also it would be used to inform future procurement of devices. So actually what types of devices they want to procure moving forwards as a council, you know, what features they need to have in terms of screen size, in terms of touch screen, etc., in terms of OS system. And then from a Southwark perspective, they will be presenting to digital inclusion working groups, Essential Digital Skills Group, and then also sharing these insights to external partners, so as community groups, job centres, DWP, and then also I believe they're creating some how-to videos for Southwark residents to post online. So it will be used to inform the targeting and creation of those videos. So for example, how to create a My Southwark account. And then also alongside the persona work from Westminster, they're gonna use this to inform what residents they target with sort of physical digital inclusion guides too. And then in terms of the wider LOTI project, we had a bit of a think, and we thought probably the two key areas where this fits in is including it in the methodology and findings in the toolkit. So obviously other local authorities can see these insights, can replicate the work, and can use these to inform their policy moving forwards. But also it could form the basis of a further project building on how we can assist a wider range of residents. So for example, it might be something we think about in terms of how we use the Mayor's Fund as well once it's released. So yeah, that's a summary of sort of the next steps that we've thought of initially, but it'd be great to discuss